Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are a mess. Nintendo's responded to it, kind of. So let's talk about it. Welcome to Mike Text It Out. I'm Mike, and I'm back to talk about Pokemon. I was supposed to do this video yesterday, but I've been having issues with my sleep schedule that I don't want to get into. And plus, Nintendo responded to it on Thursday, so me being late is actually an advantage and not just an excuse for me being sleepy and not recording the video. But anyway, today I'm here to talk about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And let me talk about my history of Pokemon really quick, because I've played all the games. I finished most of them, at least the main story, which is always just collect all the badges to go to the Pokemon League, etc. Most of the games, with the exception of a few like Black and White, and the last one for 3DS, the island theme one, was that Sun and Moon. As far as the anime, I don't actually watch it anymore. I don't know who most of the Pokemon are before I play the game. I just like to discover the Pokemon by playing the game. So I'm more of a game fan than an anime fan, but either way, Pokemon is one of those days in our household between me and my husband that we get really excited for. It was one of those games that we already had pre-ordered and preloaded. So when this game dropped, of course, we were ready to play it on day one. But immediately when we played it, we noticed the performance issues. And this is probably one of the buggiest games in general that I've played. Not just Pokemon, but just all around. It's kind of a mess. The most noticeable thing is the performance. Now, if it was a consistent 30 frames per second, then it wouldn't be that noticeable, but it just kind of dips and goes all over the place. So it just feels really chunky while you're playing it. Now, I wouldn't say that it feels unplayable, but it's definitely going to feel a little bit rough. It's not the smoothest experience. I think even if they had got like a locked lower than 30 frame rate, like if it was a lock 25, maybe it probably would have felt better than what it does right now. The other thing are, of course, the glitches, and there's just various glitches throughout the game. Now, I haven't noticed anything game breaking. Most of the ones I've seen have been stuff where people disappear, or objects will just show up in weird places, but nothing that's been like, oh, the game is now broken and is unplayable. The other thing is just the graphics in general. Now, Pokemon has kind of had a break, because before the Switch came out in 2017, Pokemon, at least the mainline games, have always been on the handhelds. It was one of those things that was a big deal for the handhelds. I mean, if we look at Pokemon alone, it was enough to probably keep people from buying like a PSP and a Vita, even though the graphics were way better than what Nintendo was offering at the time. It's a really powerful franchise. So obviously with Nintendo in 2017 deciding to do a hybrid handheld, they got to bring Pokemon to the big screen. The main issue with the graphics aren't that they're necessarily bad overall. It's just that there's a lot of issues with them. Like the grass a lot of the times look like crap, and it gets in the way of certain scenes. Like, for instance, if you're evolving a Pokemon there in the grass just looks really weird. It looks like some construction paper got caught in some light or something like that. Also, a lot of times if you zoom in on textures, it looks bad. Like, especially if you're catching a Pokemon and it zooms in on something, it looks like some PS2 type assets. There's just there's just several things with the graphics that look out of place. But from a general standpoint, they look okay. They're not amazing. And also, there's this weird thing that the game does where stuff in the background just runs at a way lower frame rate. This, I guess, will kind of fall under the frame rate category, but also under the graphics, because I feel like it's intentional, because if you get closer to these objects or the people, then they start to run at a normal frame rate. But when you get further away from them, they lower the frame rate to such a point where it's distracting. Like, the animations will be at like 1 or 2 frames per second, and it just looks like someone's doing stop motion in the background. I don't know why they made this decision, but pretty sure this was intentional, probably to help performance, but it just looks really out of place. But going back to what I said before about this being transitional, we did have other mainline Pokemon games, and I'll count Arceus in there too. I'm not counting Let's Go or the other remake. I'll count Sword and Shield, Arceus, and then this game. If we look at Pokemon Sword and Shield, we saw some of the frame rate issues in the wild area. Now, there weren't nearly as many glitches, but I think it's because the way they do battles in Violet and Scarlet are a lot closer to Arceus, where they just kind of happen wherever the Pokemon is or the person is standing. And also the animations for the Pokemon, like the way they animate in the world, are just way better in Scarlet and Violet. So obviously this is a completely different game. They really did step it up for this generation, so I think that's probably why there's more issues. But we can kind of get an inkling of the frame rate issues if we look at Sword and Shield, just because of the wild areas. And the main difference with the wild areas in Sword and Shield versus The main game was that in the wild areas you had free camera movement, and in the main part of the game you didn't. So obviously in Sword and Shield, in the main areas of the game, since they didn't have to render the stuff that the player couldn't see, that saved on performance. And then in the wild areas you got out there and you're like, what's this? You know, the frame rate would drop because they had to render everything in case you turn the camera away that they're not expecting. And in this game, aside from like a few indoor areas in the academy, you have free camera movement. So I think that's why we're seeing this consistently bad frame rate throughout the game. And then we can talk about Arceus, which is a completely different beast. Arceus itself wasn't as plagued by performance issues, but it was kind of a different game. Also, the world was kind of sectioned off into different areas. Like you went and you did your little adventure and you came back. It was a smaller portion of the map that you were dealing with. Also, there weren't as many Pokemon in the game. But we can't chalk all of that up to just being a smaller area and not as many Pokemon. I think with Arceus, it was probably developed by a different team within Game Freak, because they've already confirmed that Arceus was in development at the same time as Sword and Shield was, and being that it came out after Sword and Shield, that means that it was also in development while Scarlet and Violet was. So I'm thinking that they probably have two different teams that are working on both of these games. I think that's why Arceus isn't suffering from some of these issues that Scarlet and Violet are, because it's probably developed by a different team. Now, they borrowed some of the ideas from that game, but it doesn't feel exactly the same. It wasn't executed the same. So I'm under the impression that it was probably a different team, and that's why they didn't run into these same performance issues. So what I really feel like is happening here is I think they were a little bit too ambitious of what they were trying to execute with this game. And Nintendo essentially came out and said that they heard the feedback and they want to please their fans, and they're going to be working on, you know, improving the game. They already released the first patch on Thursday, and I didn't notice any major improvements. One of the things that it introduced was ranked battles, but as far as the glitches and everything, it seemed relatively the same. So they really are going to fix everything that's wrong with this game. It's probably going to take a while, but who knows if they're actually going to address the performance part of it or if it's just glitches. They really didn't say what exactly they're going to fix. You would think that they would work on improving everything, but also this game is selling really well. So if people aren't that worried about it, I don't see Nintendo and Game Freak probably wanting to allocate a lot of resources to fixes, maybe some of the more noticeable glitches, but that's probably it. And the reason I say this is because those frame rate issues were present in the trailers and everything that Nintendo showed at their Nintendo Directs. So like we're seeing these same performance issues in the game that they obviously knew about it because they were in the trailer. But it's not like Nintendo was caught off guard by this. So that's why I'm kind of like weary about if they're actually going to fix the performance or not. I will say, despite everything that we just talked about, I really am enjoying the game. This is probably one of my favorite games in the series so far. It's really taken it to the next level, and I know as far as traditional console RPGs that it's still not up to snuff. I know I'm grading on a curve because my expectations are probably lower because Pokemon's been a handheld game for so long, and we're finally getting a console version of it with features that other open world games have. Like this really feels like the first real open world Pokemon game, even though they've all been kind of open world. They actually give you other side quests on the map. You can set destinations. Like there's a lot of stuff they've done to modernize this game. They really did try to make the game better, and I guess a part of the reason that I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt is because they really could have just reskinned Sword and Shield and just re-released another version of that game with different assets, and they probably still would have sold millions and millions of copies. But they didn't do that. They tried to do something that was better and tried to improve the experience. Like if you play the Pokemon games throughout the years, they've always tried to slowly add things. I think this was them trying to really leave that handheld background behind and make this feel like a console game. And there's a lot of things they did right, but there's a lot of issues with the game. So I can understand from your perspective if you want to wait to see if these issues get fixed before you buy the game. There are a lot of glitches. Like I said, I haven't run into anything game breaking, but I know when I reported last week about the refund, some people said that the game was actually making them sick on the Switch OLED, and that is a thing. Some people do get sickness from OLED screens, especially if like it's an inconsistent frame rate. So if you have sensitivities to frame rate, or the glitches annoy you or something like that, then I definitely would avoid this game right now and maybe check back on it in a few months to see what's going on with it and see what they fixed. But yeah, overall, it's still a fun game. If you do decide to buy it and you're a fan of those games, I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. I've had a lot of fun with it personally, but I do think Nintendo and Game Freak need to be held accountable and make sure this game gets fixed. But that's going to do it for today. I'll be back for another sensational Sunday. We're going to talk about some news. But until then, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell notification to be notified when I drop a video, and always do at least 2 things at the same time.